My brother always said, I'm the responsible one. When he took over the family estate. So I uncovered his gambling problem, exposed him, and got him written out of the will. The rain had been coming down in heavy sheets all night. I remember it vividly because, as I lay in bed half asleep, I could hear the dull sound of raindrops bouncing off the windowpane, a rhythm that would normally lull me to sleep. But tonight was different. My phone started buzzing on the nightstand, and the name Sophia glowed against the dark. My heart dropped. Sophia never called at 3 a.m. unless something was seriously wrong. Ben, she said, her voice urgent and shaky, you need to come to Mom's place. It's important. The adrenaline kicked in instantly. What's going on? Is it Mom? Is she okay? She's okay, Sophia stammered, her words thick with something I couldn't quite place. But you just need to come. Please, Ben. And, we need to talk about Derek. Derek? I repeated, frowning. What does Derek have to do with this? I can't explain right now. Just come, please. And hurry. I was already pulling on a hoodie and jeans. As I got into my car, the rain pelted the windshield, my headlights barely cutting through the thick, foggy mist that hung over the road. I had a sense of dread as I drove through the empty streets of Richmond, Virginia. Our hometown had always been quiet, the same neighborhoods with the same people. But something told me that whatever was waiting at Mom's house tonight would change things. When I pulled up to Mom's house, a quaint little place by the James River with ivy crawling up the bricks and a creaky old rocking chair on the front porch, I could see Sophia pacing back and forth in the living room through the front window. She looked pale, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. My gut twisted with worry. Soph? I called as I opened the front door, wiping rain off my jacket. What's going on? She looked up, her eyes wide and bloodshot. She'd been crying. It's Derek, she said, barely above a whisper, like saying his name out loud was going to make him appear. I think he's been stealing from Mom. Stealing? I froze, shaking my head. Derek? She nodded, glancing nervously toward the hallway where Mom's bedroom was. I know it sounds insane. But, I've been keeping track of her bank statements. She's been losing money, thousands of dollars, Ben. It's been disappearing, and she can't explain where it's going. I frowned, trying to process what she was saying. Are you sure? Derek. He's always been the responsible one. You know that. Sophia let out a bitter laugh, brushing a tear away. Yeah, responsible. That's what we all thought. But I confronted him, and he got so defensive, Ben. And his explanation? He said he was just helping manage her finances. But I found withdrawals from ATMs she's never used, and last week, she couldn't cover the cost of her medication. That doesn't sound like Derek, I muttered, though a cold feeling had already started forming in my chest. Did he say anything else? No. But here's the thing, she continued, leaning closer. One of the places where the money was withdrawn? It's that casino over in Norfolk. The one that opened last year. I blinked, caught off guard. Derek in a casino? That wasn't something I'd ever pictured. Sure, he'd mentioned the casino once, in passing, as a joke. I figured it was just a one-time thing, like his occasional golf outings or steakhouse dinners with his work buddies. Derek had always liked living the good life. But, this? Soph, you can't be serious. Derek? Gambling? I said, though I knew there was something in my tone, something doubtful, that gave me away. She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in as she spoke. Ben, I wish I wasn't. But I went to the bank with Mom last week, and her statements are clear as day. I'm telling you, this isn't just him having fun, he's taking her money, and it's going to feed something. I think he has a gambling problem, Ben. And if we don't do something, Mom's going to lose everything. I sank onto the couch, rubbing a hand over my face. The words felt foreign on my tongue. What do we do? She exhaled sharply, looking both relieved and terrified. We need proof, Ben. Solid proof. I don't want to confront him until we know exactly what's going on. Over the next few weeks, we became investigators in our own family. I never thought I'd end up spending my nights following my own brother around town, but there I was. Sophia and I would take turns watching his movements, jotting down the times he left Mom's place, where he went, and how long he stayed. It felt ridiculous, like we were two amateurs trying to play detective in some overdramatic soap opera. But the evidence kept piling up. We watched him go to that casino 3 times. And each time, it was the same routine. He'd stop by Mom's place, stay for about an hour, and then drive straight there. One Saturday night, I decided I'd had enough. Sophia and I were parked a block away from the casino, watching Derek as he disappeared into the flashing lights and noise. It was eating me alive, seeing my brother like this. I turned to Sophia, who was sitting in the passenger seat, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. This is it, Soph, I said. I'm going in. I need to see this for myself. She looked at me, her face pale but determined. Be careful, Ben. He can't know we're onto him. I got out of the car and walked into the casino, the smell of stale smoke and desperation hitting me like a wall. It was a strange world in there, loud, garish, filled with people hunched over slot machines and tables, their faces illuminated by flickering lights. And then I saw him. Derek was at a blackjack table, leaning forward, his eyes fixed on the cards. He looked intense, almost manic, sweat glistening on his forehead. He didn't look like the brother I knew, the confident, put-together Derek with the crisp white shirts and designer shoes. This was someone else entirely. I watched as he played hand after hand, his face growing darker with each loss. I don't know how long I stood there, but at some point, he slammed his fist on the table, cursing under his breath. He looked around, a wild, desperate look in his eyes. And that's when he saw me. Ben? His voice was thick with surprise, confusion, and anger. He stood up abruptly, brushing past the dealer and storming toward me. "What the hell are you doing here?" I tried to keep my voice steady. "I could ask you the same question." He glared at me, his eyes cold. "This is none of your business." "It is when you're gambling away Mom's money," I said, barely keeping my voice from shaking. "Derek, I know. I know about the withdrawals, the casino, everything. How long have you been doing this?" He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed in the noisy casino. "So you're spying on me now, huh? Is that it? You and Sophia, playing the heroes? Derek, this isn't about us. This is about you stealing from our own mother. You can't keep doing this. Whatever you're going through, you need help." His face twisted, and he took a step closer, his voice low and venomous. "You think you understand, Ben? You think you have any idea what it's like to carry this burden? Mom didn't trust you with her finances, did she? She trusted me. I'm the one who's been there for her, who's handled everything since Dad died. You just went off to California, left us all behind." I felt the heat rise in my face, but I forced myself to stay calm. "This isn't about who she trusted, Derek. This is about you betraying that trust. Mom's struggling to pay her bills while you're throwing her money away on this addiction." His jaw clenched, and for a moment, I thought he might hit me, but then he just laughed again, that hollow, bitter laugh that sent a chill down my spine. "Addiction? You really think you're that smart, don't you? I don't have a problem, Ben. I just needed a little help. One big win, and I'd have it all sorted. I was going to put the money back. You're in over your head, Derek. You need to stop. If you don't, I'm going to Mom. I'm telling her everything." His face darkened, his fists clenched at his sides. "You go ahead and tell her, then. But don't think for a second that you're any better than me. You think you're the hero in this story? You're just as selfish as the rest of us." He stormed past me, shoving me aside as he walked out of the casino. I stood there, heart pounding, feeling the weight of everything that had just happened crash down on me. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the argument replaying in my head over and over. I knew what I had to do, but it felt like a betrayal. Derek was my brother. We'd grown up together, shared so many memories, so much history. And now, I was about to destroy whatever was left of that bond. The next morning, I drove to Mom's house, my heart heavy. When I walked in, she was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping her coffee, her face lighting up when she saw me. "Ben. This is a surprise," she said, smiling warmly. "Come sit. I just made a fresh pot." I sat down, trying to steady myself. "Mom, we need to talk." Her smile faded, and she set her coffee down, looking at me with concern. "Is everything all right?" I took a deep breath, my hands shaking slightly. "It's about Derek." For the next hour, I laid everything out, the withdrawals, the casino, the money he'd been taking. I watched as her face went through a range of emotions, confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally, heartbreak. By the time I finished, she was silent, her eyes filled with tears. I don't understand," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Derek's always been so responsible." "I know, Mom," I said, reaching out to hold her hand. "But he's in trouble. He needs help, and he's hurting you in the process." She nodded slowly, her hand trembling in mine. "I can't believe he would do this. My own son." I sat with her for a long time, just holding her hand, letting her process everything. It was one of the hardest moments of my life, watching the pain in her eyes, the realization that the son she'd trusted most had betrayed her. A few weeks later, she rewrote her will, cutting Derek out entirely. It was a brutal decision, but she knew it was necessary. She couldn't risk him hurting her again, not like this. Derek didn't come around after that. He stopped calling, stopped visiting. It was like he'd disappeared from our lives completely, leaving behind only the broken pieces of what used to be. And sometimes, late at night, I think of him at that blackjack table, chasing a win that would never come, lost in a world he couldn't escape. It's a painful thought, but I remind myself that I did what I had to do. Some things, once broken, can't ever be put back together. After Derek vanished from our lives, I tried to settle back into some semblance of normalcy, focusing on Mom and making sure she was alright. But the betrayal still haunted her. I'd catch her lost in thought, her eyes glassy as she sipped her morning coffee, as if she were still struggling to understand how her son could do such a thing. And I knew it was eating her alive that she couldn't confront him, make him own up to what he'd done. She needed closure, just as much as I did. For months, there was no sign of Derek. I'd get occasional updates from mutual friends who'd see him around Richmond, always at seedy bars or low-rent clubs. One old friend told me he'd seen Derek try to charm his way into borrowing money, but it didn't sound like he was doing too well. Part of me wanted to just let it be, to let him spiral out and leave him to whatever mess he was making of himself. But then Mom's health took a turn. Her doctor mentioned she needed to move into assisted living, a place where she could get daily help. I knew it was inevitable, but it broke me a little to realize the woman who had always been our rock was fading. And to top it all off, the costs of her care were intense. I'd known it would be expensive, but looking at the actual numbers, it became clear that if we hadn't cut Derek off when we did, we'd be in real trouble now. One evening, as I was sorting through her things to prepare for the move, I came across some old family paperwork. Bills, loan statements, the deed to the family house, all of it tied up in a neat little folder Mom had labeled important. But as I flipped through the papers, something caught my eye, an old document that showed my father had left a small property up in Fairfax, one I'd barely remembered hearing about. It was a cabin he'd inherited from his own father, hidden away in the Virginia woods. It was when I found the cabin's deed that an idea began to form. If Derek wanted to drain the family dry, then maybe, just maybe, I could turn the tables. It took weeks of planning and some quiet work on my end to pull it off, but eventually, I managed to track Derek down. I'd hired a private investigator who'd kept tabs on him, letting me know that he'd been crashing at a buddy's place on the outskirts of town, his life apparently consisting of gambling, short-term jobs, and occasional benders. The investigator gave me Derek's address, and I found myself standing outside a dingy, barely held together apartment building on a gray November morning. I'd never felt so torn. On one hand, it was satisfying to see the responsible Derek finally living the consequences of his actions, but on the other, there was a part of me that was still painfully aware he was my brother. I knocked, and when he opened the door, I barely recognized him. His eyes were bloodshot, his face thinner, his clothes wrinkled. He looked worn down, stripped of that polished, confident exterior I'd known so well. "Ben?" He blinked, looking at me as if I were a ghost. "What the hell are you doing here? Can I come in?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, though every nerve in my body was tense. He shrugged, stepping aside. His apartment was cluttered, a stark contrast to the neat, organized life he used to lead. The faint smell of stale smoke lingered in the air, and there were beer cans scattered across the coffee table. I noticed his computer on the desk, open to some online betting site. He was still at it. "What do you want, Ben?" he asked, flopping onto the couch, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "I've been working with Mom to sort out some of the family finances," I began carefully. "And we found something interesting. Something you might want to know about." He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of curiosity breaking through his tired expression. "What, you're here to tell me she left you more money?" "Not exactly," I replied, holding up the deed to the cabin. "Dad left us a property up in Fairfax. It's nothing huge, an old cabin, a little rundown, but it's ours. Mom doesn't have much use for it, and we figured, you might want to stay there. You know, a fresh start, away from everything. It's worth a decent amount if you wanted to sell it." Derek sat up, his eyes widening a bit as he looked at the paper. I could practically see the gears turning in his head as he calculated what he could get out of it. For the first time, he actually looked hopeful. "And you're just offering this to me?" he asked, his voice filled with suspicion. I shrugged. "Your family, Derek. And, Mom doesn't want to see you like this. She wants to give you a chance to get back on your feet. I figured maybe, this could be it." He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes darting back and forth between me and the deed, like he was waiting for the catch. But there was none. I watched as he reached out slowly, taking the deed from my hand, his fingers trembling a little. There was something in his expression, a glimmer of gratitude, maybe, that made me think, just for a second, that this might actually work. A few days later, I met with Derek again, up at the cabin. The place was modest, tucked away off a narrow dirt road, surrounded by thick Virginia forest. Derek arrived, looking marginally better, his clothes less wrinkled, his eyes a little brighter. He actually seemed excited, hopeful for the first time in ages. "So, this is it," I said, nodding toward the cabin as we walked up to it. "It's got potential. Needs some fixing up, but I think you could make it work." He looked around, nodding slowly, taking it all in. "Yeah, it's peaceful," he said, almost to himself. I handed him the keys, watching as he turned them over in his hands, a faint smile breaking through his usually hardened expression. "I appreciate this, Ben. Really. I know I've messed up. But maybe this is a chance to start over." I nodded, feeling that same pang of pity and frustration rise in my chest. I hope so, Derek. Just, don't waste it. He gave me a curt nod, his eyes hardening. I won't. I'd done my part. I'd given him the cabin and walked away, hoping he'd actually take the opportunity to turn his life around. But, of course, Derek wasn't about to change. It didn't take long for me to hear about his next move. Within a few weeks, he had a buyer lined up for the cabin, some real estate developer looking to expand a hunting retreat in the area. I didn't say anything to Mom. I knew she'd just be disappointed to learn that Derek's promises of starting fresh were as hollow as ever. But here's the thing, Derek never actually checked the terms of the cabin's deed. The property was left in a trust, one set up by my father years ago, and to sell it legally, Derek needed both Mom's and my signatures. Which I, of course, had no intention of giving. It didn't take long for him to find out. I was at home one evening when my phone lit up with a call from Derek. I let it go to voicemail. Then he called again. And again. Finally, after the fifth call, I picked up. Ben, you need to sign off on this. I already have a buyer lined up, and it's worth more than we thought. We're talking serious money here. I kept my voice calm. I'm not signing anything, Derek. There was a long silence. What do you mean you're not signing? This is my chance, Ben. My chance to start over. You can't take this from me. I can, and I am, I replied, my tone icy. You had a chance, Derek, a real one. But you blew it. This cabin, this trust, it's not yours to sell. And I'm done helping you make a mess of everything Dad built for us. Ben, please, he said, his voice cracking, desperation flooding into his tone. I need this. You needed help years ago, Derek. And I was willing to give it. But you took advantage of Mom, stole from her, and lied to all of us. You've made your choices. Now live with them. He tried calling again and again, leaving pleading messages, begging for one last chance. But I ignored them all. Eventually, he stopped, and I heard that he'd left Richmond altogether, drifting from town to town, unable to settle. Mom passed away a few years later, and I took care of her, just as she'd taken care of us our whole lives. The cabin stayed in the family, a little piece of my father's legacy, untouched by Derek's hands. And when I visit it now, I feel a strange sense of peace, knowing that, in the end, I'd protected what mattered most. Some bonds, once broken, can never be repaired. And some lessons, painful as they are, need to be learned the hard way.